I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. I want to get right to it. Our guest today is Kacher. She is a globally recognized workforce solutions specialist and founder of the Career Life Alliance Services. Kathy is quoted often across mainstream media, including CBS News, the New York Post, and the Washington Post, where she provides her insight on return to office, quiet quitting, and other workplace issues. Welcome, Kathy Kacher.
Thank you so much, Dan. It is a delight to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to get together and talk about this important topic.
Well, we're going to get to that topic, but before we do, I was wondering if you could share with our audience, what is it that you do and your brand provides to your clients?
Well, it's an interesting story because we kind of have to keep reinventing ourselves. So I started my company back in 1987. And at that time, we were focusing on women entering the workforce and what can organizations do to support women and families in the workplace. And from there, we pivoted a bit and got into workplace flexibility. And so for most of my career, my job has been educating organizations on how to create flexible workplaces, which included policy development and how do we request flexibility? How do we build those guardrails? How do we train managers to lead differently? Brilliant. And it worked really well for many years. And then 2020 came. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I am like reverse engineering this whole situation. Yeah. It's not getting people out and flexible and remote or virtual. It's getting people back. And we've definitely had to make some changes.
Well, that's a good tee up for today's question, which was submitted by a viewer who asked that I don't use their name and don't identify them by gender either. They're that twitchy. So they work for a company that is one of the stalwarts in the financial services space. And this viewer writes that they dragged us back into headquarters, took away our free coffee and snacks, and now we're operating in DEFCON 3. They add, my boss, who'd always held himself with positivity and confidence, is now twitchy and amped up about the group's already solid performance. This viewer asks you, why is my boss so paranoid about productivity? Why is their boss so paranoid, Kathy?
You know, it's a tough situation to be a manager in today's environment. And because the disconnect between the C-suite and the individual contributor is completely different. I think only 12% of leaders, this was just a Microsoft report that came out, 12% of leaders are confident that their team is productive, while 87% of employees are very confident they're doing exactly what they need to do. And you know who's in the middle? Mm-hmm. The manager. Yeah. The manager. And so they're getting pressure from the top to reflect the performance of their team, and that they're passing it right down to the individual contributors and the direct reports. And it is creating a crisis at all levels of the organization.
Well, let's talk about that crisis. It's so ripped from the news. So already this morning, today's January 18th, Microsoft announced that they are going to cut 10%, 10,000 from their workforce of 221,000 people, which is about a little under 5%. They had actually hired 40,000 people in 2022. I didn't know that.
Wow.
But it's still 10,000 people in some parts of the country is a zip code. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
so that's really tough. And then 2 weeks ago, you know, Mark Benioff at Salesforce made the news when he announced a 10% workforce cut. But this one was a little strange. He cited low productivity as the reason. And initially, he only notified 1% of those who were going to be let go, leaving 99% of the company remaining paranoid and unproductive. And as my friend and someone very popular on LinkedIn, Steve Cadigan, wrote, now let me see if I've got this right. Salesforce announces a 10% staff reduction coming due largely because of low productivity. And as of today, you wrote this about a week ago, they've only notified 1% of the workforce, and now 99% remaining are wondering if they will be part of the 9% to be let go, which is virtually guaranteeing zero productivity until that decision is made. What do you make of all this, Kathy?
Well, I wonder if he's not being a little bit crafty and creating that anxiety, prompting people to outperform and overperform in
Right.
hopes of hanging on to their job. Could that be a strategy? You know, I don't know. But one thing without a doubt is, like so many CEOs today, he's not doing what he or she can to create a culture of trust, of engagement, of belonging. I mean, it is crazy. During the pandemic, we saw CEOs coming from their kitchens with their kids in their lap. We support you. Whatever you need, we got you. And people got corporations through the crisis in big ways. And now it's like a complete pivot. It's like, well, we hired too many. We got to get rid of some. You're not productive enough. What happened? How did I become so unproductive in such a short amount of time? So
How much of this is theater
always.
for investors, for people that trade in securities, who play options markets?
I always think that there's a whole group of individuals somewhere up in a boardroom, you know, puppet masters of the situation, just grabbing different headlines and driving different markets. You know, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but it's certainly something to think about.
Hey, everyone, submit your questions. This is really a on fire topic today. So if you've got a question for Kathy Kacher, please submit it in the comment thread and we'll get to it. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you about how we measure productivity, which, I've been in the workforce a while. I was a headhunter for many years. I could never get my head wrapped around a Bureau of Labor Statistics definition that made any sense because it was always written in government speak.
Right.
But to the best of my knowledge, what it always felt like was the numerator was dollars of value output and the denominator would be hours worked. And so what you try to do is either, from the hours worked, get more output. And if you can't do that, then cut down the number of hours by letting people go. Is that a fair assumption of a definition of productivity as we understand it in this economy? Or do you have a different take on it?
Well, I feel like that's an outdated definition of productivity. I think back when they were, first reporting statistics, it was manufacturing. That's very easy to measure.
Right.
I mean, it's very easy to track how many cars you make and how many widgets you produce, and you can put that up against how much profit was made, so it made sense at the time. But today, so many knowledge workers, and I think that's where companies have the big struggle. I have yet to discover an organization that has mastered performance management. I mean, you remember not so long ago, it was just an annual chat. Okay, set your goals.
Right.
Here's what you're going to do this year. Nobody ever took anything off that list. I mean, they just kept building and building and building. And today, finally, organizations are looking at that and doing a little bit more of a coaching style performance management. And that's the direction it needs to go. But I don't think anyone's equipped to do it right just yet. But maybe it'll come. But I can't imagine that the that the labor statistics that we're seeing truly reflect productivity in the United States today.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that you were mentioning, which where 87% of headcount thinks that they are being productive,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's a disconnect to what the C-suite is thinking. And in the middle is this headcount leader, headcount
Mm-hmm.
manager. I think the paranoia is understandable. They care about the people that they work with, that roll up to them. And yet they're on the line based on what comes from up on high. So what's going on with those managers? And I can only imagine it's having a deleterious effect on actually increasing productivity. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, again, the pressure from the C-suite, and I'm seeing this in the headlines as well. We're seeing the real estate drop, real estate occupancy drop. So these, CEOs have large books of real estate, and they can't change that because most of them have long leases up, 15 years, or they own the building. So they are working so hard to make sure that their expense is being utilized. And they think that's best done by getting people back in the office. And so many of the C-suite leaders are old school, right? They manage by sight. I actually had a client that we were working with their return to office, and the CEO was so concerned about people not coming into the office or leaving too soon that he actually went into the lobby. He sat in the lobby and watched people leave. I mean, it was talk about paranoia. So what managers, their situation is, it's time to step back. It's time to really crystallize what is this team meant to accomplish, and how can we focus on outcomes and results versus keystrokes, time at the desk, how many hours are you online? It's a hard shift to make, especially for knowledge workers, because oftentimes measures are not that tangible. So the challenge is real for them. The pressure is, large, and they're under a lot of pressure. The solution is really rethinking, how is it that I manage and measure my team? And how do I build trust? Because trust is the operating system of any successful team. And I think that's where the biggest gap is today. For some reason, people stop trusting leaders, employees. Something broke.
Is there high correlation to achieving trust to an organization based on how well people in the C-suite know people at the lowest rungs of the company? What I mean by that is, the late Herb Kelleher, who was a founder of Southwest Airlines, was legendary for going out on the tarmac and talking to the guys and gals loading cargo on the planes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that needs to be focused on? And can
Yes.
that help a middle
Yes.
manager?
Yeah, and as because the directive seems to be coming from the very top, when I work with organizations, my number one ask for them is, please get your executives to the front line, get on the floor, get involved, have conversations, because where leaders go, people follow, and people want their leaders to see them, especially the higher levels. People will come to the office to sit and have a lunch chat with one of the executives. So the leaders play a significant role, and it can't just be this, I command. We've seen the different, CEOs spouting off various messages. You can't just declare what you want, because what you're doing is you are completely destroying that feeling of trust and connection and belonging that you worked so hard to build over the pandemic to make sure you hung on to people during the talent crisis. Didn't want to lose anybody. Got to keep them here. Got to keep them happy. And all of a sudden, like I said, it pivoted, and it's going to take several years to fix the promises that they broke. And they did break promises. I know many organizations, people said, wait a minute, my job was supposed to be, 1 day a week in the office. And now you're telling me 4 days? I'm sorry. But now with the layoffs and all those headlines, people are like, I'm not leaving. I can't leave now.
Well, you talk about return to the office, and there are a lot of independent variables, if you will, that play into the importance of it. So you've got companies that their motivation is, I've got all this unused real estate, or like Jamie Dimon, I've just built this glass palace on Park Avenue, our new headquarters, and it's so wonderful, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
And you need to be there.
Stay in the kingdom. Yeah.
So right. So that's one independent variable. But more seriously, you've got a case of contrast, which is how is the company built and how is it meant to be built? You got Walt Disney Company, which after the pandemic for 2 years had a lot of people operating remotely. And all you need to do is look at some of the releases that came out, especially some of the illustrated feature films, which are terrible. Yeah. And Bob Iger's looking at us and saying, hey, folks, we were built as a company for being in the same room and working out problems and being collaborative, right? And I get it. I don't know Bob. We graduated from the same program. I know a lot of people who know him and respect him. I understand why they respect him. And I get his point about 4 in the office, 1 out. We need to be in the same room to work out these creative challenges. And then you've got companies like GitLab, which were founded as 100% distributed workforces. They don't own real estate. They did at one point. They don't anymore. And that's built into their fabric. That's part of their secret sauce. Right. You know what you're getting into when you work at this company. How important is that going forward, that you know what you're getting into? When you look at a job spec, how important is it going to be that the hiring manager spell out the location aspect of the job?
Oh, absolutely important. That's one of the first questions people who are looking for new positions are asking. What is my obligation to be on site? So that's very important. I like that Disney story because when I'm talking with organizations, the other ask that we have for them is, what is your why? And it better be good.
Yep.
It better be good. And Disney, it's good. Right. We did not succeed when we were away from each other. Now we had a formula. It was successful. The formula couldn't work in this pandemic. Now let's get back to the formula. They probably will advance and they'll probably integrate a much more hybrid. They already did with the 1 day from home. But the organizations I work with do struggle with their why. And it always comes down to, because the CEO wants it. It's what I want. And it's like, boy, it's hard to turn that into a value proposition for employees. And I'd love to hear from the people who are listening. I'm curious about their experience too. So I don't know if you're getting any posts or questions, but.
Well, we did get one question from Stuart Katz, who I think he's getting to an issue of framing. My mother always said to me, work hard. And I'm like, I'd rather work smart, so is work smarter, not harder? He says a tagline, but I think he's referring to a message framing, which is to say, yeah, I know you're crushing it and you're all working very, very long hours. But I mean, to your point from earlier, how do we get to that work smarter that really celebrates the outcomes and not the fact that middle manager is clocking in 60 hours a week on top of commuting 4 hours a day each, round trip? What are your thoughts?
I think the best way to really understand how an organization can work smarter is for managers, leadership, go to the producers, go to the front line. There are so many programs that have been introduced because somebody read a book we're going to do it. We're going to do a new process. But rarely do they stop and go to the very front line, the very last person who touches the product or the output and say, how can we do it better? That's where everything they need. It's like a Disney movie. Everything you need is right here. You just have to seek it out and listen. But I sure don't see a lot of that going on.
I mentioned to you in pre-interview that several years ago, I lived and worked in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Lived in Minneapolis, worked in St. Paul. And one of my clients was, in fact, the 3M company.
Yeah.
And those very things that, oh, really?
Yeah.
Those very things that you talked about, I think happened there organically. And maybe it's because the place was one big laboratory.
Yeah.
They did a lot of cause and effect there. Products didn't just get rolled out. They started as projects. And they looked to see what blew up in the lab and what special qualities accidentally got created. So you grew up, so to speak, in the neighborhood of companies that did that organically. What other things do you think they do that should be lessons for companies outside of the country, which are maybe more prone to the news of the day and the profit motivations and the price per share measures and, of course, all the layoff news and so forth? How do we get back to that laboratory?
Wow, that is a very, very good question. And it's interesting. So 3M was actually a client of mine for many, many years. And the one thing that they had head and shoulders above most of my clients was their innovation. I mean, that was a cornerstone for them, to innovate, and not just in the labs, but in the way they treated their employees. They were the first ones. They did a national elder care, dependent care system to support, people with elderly dependents. They were as creative in the lab, or they were as creative in their employee benefits as they were in the lab. They had flexibility programs in place, right up there, when is about the same time the federal government wrote them out. But they were furnishing offices at homes. I mean, it's innovation, I think. And I don't know, I think companies talk a lot about, we want to be innovative, but they're not finding the spark that will ignite the innovation across the organization. But it comes, I think, from how you treat the people.
And I think also understanding that, well, maybe not so much in the Twin Cities. I don't think anybody had a problem necessarily with getting to work in the morning, but But I can tell you that when I lived in Connecticut and had a commute into Midtown Manhattan 3 times a week, and now for many years living in the Washington, D.C. suburbs with some of the worst traffic imaginable, when hiring managers, and I use that term broadly, don't fully recognize the struggles that people have, that they may be getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure they're in the office at 8 o'clock. That they're giving up dentist appointments because they're told they have to be in a meeting, or missing their kids' sports intramural games. So I think your point about 3M Company is very well taken. I mean, it's really built into the ethos of that brand.
Yeah, definitely.
So what other things are creating paranoia in the mind of a hiring manager these days, beyond the pressure to outperform and kowtow, if you will, to the C-suite?
I hate to lay everything at the feet of the manager. It all comes back to getting more strategic and focusing on results and output. But at the same time, employees have to own their experience. If they feel like they are not being, acknowledged for the product that they're turning in, if they're working their butts off and in a Minnesota way are just sitting back going, "Oh, I guess nobody's going to notice this,"
Oh,
you know.
yes. Minnesota nice
Minnesota passive
personified.
aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, passive aggressive. Exactly. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So people they can get in their own head and they can feel disconnected, and oftentimes they're doing it to themselves. So I think managers and their direct reports need to come together, and it needs to be accountable on both sides. It can't just be the manager. Okay, tell me
Right.
again what you're doing, and tell me.
Right.
It needs to be the employees stepping up and amplifying. This is, how I have brought value to the organization. And if we need to put that into a goal thing or check a box somewhere, do what you need to do. But make sure that what you contribute is heard. It can't just be on one manager.
You talked about, well, we're talking often about productivity now, and Gallup in 2018, Gallup has written immensely about workplace issues and done a lot of deep dive studies. And what you just said about the talent showing up and owning their deliverables and owning their understanding, you really teed up perfectly what I wanted to talk about next, which was relative to Gallup and how productivity is impacted. It is absolutely when workers don't understand their mission, and furthermore don't ask questions and say, "I don't understand. Can you explain it differently?" And when that doesn't happen,
there it is.
Management will say, "Okay, you understand. Speed up the line, Harriet." And we all know what happens to Lucy and Ethel after this. So I just wanted to tee that up. It's kind of a funny illustration, but it's really deadly serious.
Oh, yes.
That talent can't put it all on their management. They are there for a purpose. They've been hired to deliver. And yes, we need to get to a point that doesn't look only at hours worked, but outcomes achieved. And that's where the hired talent come in.
Absolutely. And it was funny, I was doing a training yesterday with a manager group, and this question came up, making sure how important it was to absolutely confirm that people understand their deliverables.
Right.
And I think the challenge is, like, if I were going to, bring somebody into my organization and I needed to tell them what to do, I'm terrible. This is not a skill set that I have. Right. Everything is in my head, and I just invite you to join me here in my head. Right. I have a very hard time articulating it. So I think that's another challenge where we are seeing a gap in the manager training. They need to be trained more deeply in how in the world can I absolutely crystallize for my people what the expectation is. And we've been moving so fast and furious that we're wrapped up in the urgent work of the day. We rarely take time to do important work. And those are job descriptions. I mean, it just comes down to the very basics, to spell it out clearly for everybody, A, B, C. Instead, we just are flying through time. And now, I don't know, we got to slow down. And this is a good time to, it's a good time right now in this first quarter to just step back and look, how are my teams operating? What do I need to do? So,
and to that point, has the efficacy of the annual review gone the way of the dodo bird?
Oh, well, the old performance management system, that was the annual review. Yeah, it's gone. And more, like I said earlier, more organizations are understanding that it needs to be more than an annual check the box. And that's all it was. Actually, some organizations are still doing it. I was talking to my daughter last night and she goes, "Oh my God, I got to do 10 reviews. I don't want to do it." I think that is the sentiment across all management levels. I don't want to do it. But when you break it down into more manageable short-term components and not this one sweeping conversation, you'll have better outcomes for both the individual contributor and the manager and the organization. Make it simple.
So Rocio Brousseau would like to know your opinion on the tools that can be used to measure task and performance like ClickUp. Do you have familiarity with that?
I'm just familiar that, let's see, what did I just read something? Many organizations during the pandemic started subscribing to those. I think they're a waste of time. I think it's a sad reflection on a lack of trust inside an organization, unless they're measuring a tactical thing,
Right.
customer service calls and things like that, where you're in a job where it's easy to measure that output. But for just to sneak in on people, whether overtly or covertly, it destroys the trust at the individual contributor level. They're just like, oh, are you kidding? Why did you even hire me? If you need to have surveillance on me, you picked me.
Right.
What? So I have strong opinions about that. None of them really very good, unless, like I said, you're tracking. You're doing a trackable job where the keystrokes matter.
I want to squeeze in one more comment, and this is from Adriana, who says, "I have a number of friends who take advantage of the home office day to program their language lessons and gym workouts. It's
That's
like
fun.
time off, but maybe the boss's paranoia has some level of assertiveness. Could this be true at some point?"
Mhm. That I love that question, because here's the thing. If the leader and the employee are just focusing on output, why does it matter if I take a break in the day to go to the gym? Why does it matter if I, go for a walk, or I quick throw my dinner together? If at the end of the day, I am doing exactly what you need me to do, it's like changing a tire.
Mm-hmm.
I can change a tire in like a half an hour. It's very sad to watch. People I know, professional tire changers, people with, better skills than I do, they can do it in 10 minutes.
Right.
The outcome is the same. So it's, what is the result? What is the outcome? And if people are able to take care of their well-being during the workday, good. We want them healthy. We want them well. They need agency to be able to exercise those, work-life balance situations.
Kathy Kacher, this has been so much fun and so interesting. I thank you so much for your time. Before we depart, I get to ask you, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work part of your day doing many meaningful things and not the all consuming day?
Well, for me, it's all about control. So I'm fortunate. I have my own organization. I think if I were dropped into a corporate setting, I probably would not last. So
Nor
for
I.
me, it is. And I think for all of us, it's all about control. I want to control, and I can. I control when I work, what work I do, how I work. Like right now, I'm in Arizona. Boy, the sun is really shining behind me. I look like
Wow,
I'm
yeah.
ascending
You
to
are
the
radiating.
heavens. Didn't know that was going to happen.
That's
So,
okay.
but yeah, so I'm in Arizona for a couple of months. It's nice that I can control the environment in which I work, because I'm not in Minnesota where there's 10 feet of snow. And that makes me happy. So yeah, it's all about control. And I know I'm not alone. People just want to be able to control their day, to live
Yeah,
their best lives. And people want to do their best work. They just want the chance to do that, I think.
that is wonderful. Where can people connect up with you if they want to have a conversation or learn more about your thought leadership?
Just find me on LinkedIn. It's just Kathy Kacher. I think there's only one of me, so it's easy. And also, I have a website. It's clalliance.com. It outlines some of the services that we provide.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dan.